Good evening. I know everyone is still making their way in. My name is Bill Smith. I'm the director of the Borah Foundation, which works with the Borah Committee to put on our annual event. And as we get ready for tonight's keynote lecture from President Carlos Alvarado, we have a special treat. A couple of our graduate students in the Lionel Hampton School of Music, who are Costa Rican, have arranged to play a couple of famous Costa Rican tunes in honor of the President's visit, also in honor of the recently recognized Costa Rican Independence Day, which was this past weekend. This is Mario Jimenez Picado and Patrick Brando Suarez, who will play the piano and sing. So you will see the two pieces, Noche Inolvidable and Patriótica Costarricense, which will run up till about when we start. And so we hope that it'll act as sort of prelude music as folks come in and sit down. Please enjoy.
Horas felices que a su lado viví. Hoy al volver otra vez con angustia recuerdo aquella noche inolvidable que no volverá. Noche con tu luna y el mar, hoy me traes el recuerdo de aquel que en mi vida fue mi único amor. Encontrarla y besarla otra vez a la orilla del mar. Cuánta tristeza profunda ha dejado en mi alma aquel amor que por siempre me robó la calma. Noche, si la vuelves a ver, dile que vuelva, que siempre la espero, no puedo olvidarla. Noche, dile que nunca me olvide, que siempre le tengo abiertas las puertas de mi corazón. Noche, con tu luna y el mar, hoy me traes el recuerdo de aquel que en mi vida fue mi único amor. Noche, si volviera a encontrarla y besarla otra vez a la orilla del mar, cuánta tristeza profunda ha dejado en mi alma aquel amor que por siempre me robó la calma. Noche, si la vuelves a ver, dile que vuelva, que siempre la espero, que no puedo olvidarla. Noche, dile que nunca me olvide, que siempre le tengo abiertas las puertas de mi corazón. Costa Rica es mi patria querida, ver el bello de aromas y flores, cuyos suelos de verdes colores, densos ramos de flores vertió. A la sombra nací de tu palma, tu sabana corrí siendo niño, y por eso mi tierno cariño cultivaste por siempre mejor. Yo no envidio los goces de Europa, la grandeza que en ella se encierra es 1000 veces más bella mi tierra, con su palma, su brisa defiendo, la quiero y la adoro, y por ella mi vida daría. Siempre libre, ostentando alegría, de sus hijos será la ilusión.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Allison Roy. I am a professor in our history department here, and I'm being waved at to not start right now. Pausing. Do we need Jeopardy music, Ro? I was just too quick, clearly. Okay, are we good now? I don't know what the hand signals mean.
Yes.
Okay, no, he's saying no. You're sending me conflicting signals. All right, now I'm allowed to go. Okay. So, as I was saying, I'm in our history department, and I am the chair of the Borah committee this year. Just wanted to say very briefly that in the title of our symposium, Peace and Security in the 21st Century, can seem dauntingly broad. And when the committee was coming up with this idea, we were really trying to think about how to highlight the sort of growing complexity of defining and also protecting the ideals of peace and security in the 21st century, both in terms of the sort of higher level state functions, but also in terms of issues that threaten peace and security for everyday people, beyond just the function of war itself. We spent a long time talking about different issues. We talked about water rights and deforestation, land defenders, as if for anyone who came and watched the film was the subject of that. Alliances, the role of the UN, cybersecurity and the potential issues that AI might cause. We tossed around all of these different ideas, and the symposium this year was born of that conversation. I'd really like to take a moment also to thank those who have come already and spoken this week. Ambassador Stephanie Williams came and spoke about her experiences working for the State Department and the UN, and her vision on how we can achieve and maintain security in the 21st century. And thank you to Professor Christopher Darnton as well, who came and spoke to us at yesterday's Renfrew colloquium on the history of US foreign diplomacy and alliances and how we sustain those alliances in our modern world. And thanks also to the Kenworthy Theater for hosting our documentary screening on Monday on the film Delicado, which, as I said, focuses on the experiences of 3 land defenders in the Philippines. The committee also wishes to sincerely thank the President's Office, the Office of the Provost, the Martin Institute, the Environmental Sciences Program, and the Program of International Studies for their ongoing support of the symposium. Special thanks as well to Ro, who also I need to learn his hand signals clearly, as well as Bill Smith, who make the symposium possible, but also keep it running mostly very smoothly. To get us started for tonight's keynote address from President Carlos Alvarado Quesada, I would like to introduce Provost Tori Lawrence. Tori's been provost and executive vice president at the University of Idaho since December of 2020. In this, he serves as our university's chief academic officer. Prior to that, Tori served as vice provost for faculty. He's also an accomplished concert tubist. He taught in the Lionel Hampton School of Music and has done so since 1998. Before joining the U of I, he was also the executive director of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra and taught at Clark College in Dubuque, Iowa. Please join me in welcoming Provost and Executive Vice President Tori Lawrence.
Thank you, Professor Roy. Good morning, or good evening, everyone. Welcome to the final event of the Borah Symposium. We're so glad you're here. I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker tonight, but first I'd like to take a moment and express some appreciation for the people who have put this together in addition to the thanks we just heard. Bill Smith and his team with the Borah Foundation put in many hours throughout the year to make this event meaningful for our students and our community. The work does really honor the legacy of Idaho Senator William Borah. So thank you to Professor Smith, the Borah Symposium Committee, and everyone who helped plan this. Thank you. Our speaker tonight follows in a long line of prominent leaders who have visited the University of Idaho throughout the rich history of the Borah Symposium. This event has a tremendous legacy of enriching our community with discussion of war and peace. We learned the unique insights of this vital topic from leaders such as Nobel Peace Prize winners, for example, Betty Williams, heads of state like F.W. de Klerk, and other prominent figures like Thurgood Marshall and Frank Church. Tonight, we welcome another highly decorated international leader. Interestingly, he is our second former president of Costa Rica. The first was Oscar Arias, who was the Borah Symposium keynote speaker in 2011. But this year, we're fortunate to welcome Carlos Alvarado Quesada. He served as the 48th president of the Republic of Costa Rica. He completed his term in 2022 after reaching the constitutional limit for that role. A little background on President Alvarado. He earned a bachelor's degree in journalism and a master's degree in political science from the University of Costa Rica. He also earned a master's degree in development studies at Sussex University in the United Kingdom. As the president of Costa Rica, he made efforts to combat global climate change, defend human rights, and advocate for democracy. In 2019, President Alvarado was named one of Time magazine's 100 Next Emerging Leaders. And later that year, Costa Rica was recognized by the United Nations Environment Champion of the Earth Award for its policy leadership under President Alvarado. National Geographic recognized President Alvarado with the Planetary Leadership Award, a title I find fascinating, a Planetary Leadership Award in 2022 for his commitment and action towards protecting the oceans. He is currently a professor of practice in diplomacy at Tufts University and a senior fellow in the Edward R. Murrow Center for a Digital World at the Fletcher School, also part of Tufts University. So please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for the 2024 Borah Symposium, Carlos Alvarado Quesada.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I really want to thank you all, Mr. President, Mr. Provost, Bill Smith, to the members of distinguished faculty here in the University of Idaho, also to students that I've been privileged to talk to during this day, also to the other speakers of the symposium. I have to say that honestly that I am moved by being here in Idaho. I feel like I'm already cheering for the Vandals, but also because the atmosphere that I have encountered here, it's of a vibrant community, and I feel so much empathy. So tonight, while I'm addressing you with some thoughts and some stories, for me success will be if I can share something with you that adds some value to your own personal and professional journeys, whether it's something interesting, inspiring, or even it's something that you do not agree with. But that contradictions of thoughts can bring something new to that, your own journey. And if that happens tonight, I will call that success. Also, thanks to my compatriotas for the music you've shared with me. It's actually very moving, and I really appreciate you bringing that piece of Costa Rica to share with all of us tonight. I will talk about generations and will and peace. Through my own journey, I have realized that legacy matters a lot. Actually, I'm really honored to be part of this Borah Symposium, because when I went through what it meant, I also saw the legacy that it carries, being created after the work of a senator of this state and his work for the Union in regards of matter of peace and war and conflict, and how influential that was. Also privileged and honored that the first speaker was someone like Eleanor Roosevelt, of that stature, that has impacted the life of all of us and still does. Just to mention her impact in what is today the United Nations, still relevant and key for, as an actor for the role in peace. And that we have to thank to legacy. So I will talk a little bit about that in the case of my own country, in the case of Costa Rica, and how I believe it's relevant. So I'll go back a little bit in time. Costa Rica is a country that, as it was said here, the 15th of September of 1821 became an independent nation. When I was in office, I had the privilege and honor to celebrate our 200th anniversary of independence while we were passing through a pandemic, which was quite a challenge. But I want to share these little vignettes of what is our tradition and what is our own legacy. For example, in 1869, education in Costa Rica, by constitution, was stated to be compulsory, free, and public for both sexes. That was, even though now it seems such a simple decision, in 1869, that started to shape a society, making education compulsory, free, and mandatory for both men and women in our country. That started to shape the society. Also in 1882, another thing very particular happened. The First Lady at the time had suffered that one of her brothers, given a political situation, was killed, put into trial and killed for treason, because there was still the death penalty was a custom in Costa Rica. So she kept that, and the debate was very much going back then. And she persuaded the president at the time that the death penalty needed to be abolished. And she succeeded on having the death penalty abolished in 1882. So since then, there has not been death penalty in Costa Rica. Other curious thing that comes together with education and technology, even being a small country in the center of the Americas. On 1884, Costa Rica became the first capital in Latin America that had illumination or lights through electricity. It was the first one. So that started to build some, those are some vignettes, some notions of how a legacy starts to be built and how it starts to shape a society. In the next century, I want you to pay attention to those two images that both of them carry a story. The first one is during Second World War, when universal healthcare was created in Costa Rica, and a system that gave access to healthcare also to all of the population. And this is in 1941. And the picture is relevant because that happened through a very curious alliance between the then president of the Republic on the left, well, all of them are wearing hats, Dr. Calderón Guardia, who just came to study from Brussels as a physician. He made an alliance with the gentleman in the middle, which is the Archbishop of the Catholic Church of Costa Rica, Monsignor Sanabria, and with the gentleman with the glasses on the right, Manuel Mora, who was the head of the Communist Party. So the Republican Party of Costa Rica, the Catholic Church, and the Communist Party come into a very peculiar alliance and made that possible. They were enemies, the three of them. But they thought that was something important to make it happen. And that was also to make it critical to the day. To this day, the standards of health of Costa Rica are compared to the standards of a wealthy country, pairing with the countries in Europe or the OECD countries. That's a lot to do with that decision taken literally decades back. I was in office, we celebrated several decades of that happening. The other picture is also relevant, not long from there. There was a major conflict, actually, between President Calderón and the gentleman there on the elections on 1948, and a civil war broke, having the revolutionary forces of the Army of National Liberation win the conflict and take upon control of Costa Rica, headed by gentleman with the hammer, José Figueres Ferrer. So he took on power after a coup. He established a series of measures that I will mention briefly afterwards, but one of them occurred there in 1948, 1st of December in 1948. And this military leader, after taking power through a coup d'etat, decided to abolish the armed forces of Costa Rica. So he, through the Constitution, said Costa Rica will not have a standing army. And that has been the case till this day. There is no military forces in Costa Rica, only a police and a Coast Guard and a Civil Guard, but no military forces. Most of those resources throughout that time till the day has been devoted, again, to education and to healthcare. And he enforced other series of measures. He created the National Electricity Company that from then to this day, it's responsible of having Costa Rica with more than 95% of clean and renewable energy. He created the Tribunal for Elections that made transparent elections. And one of the other outstanding things, and I think it links a lot with what the President was mentioning earlier, that capacity to go across the aisle. He preserved all the great measures of his political rival. He did not took away any of the reforms that were created by his predecessor, but he kept those. And they together now, even though we were from very political rivals, and even family rivalry, they are both now part of the Costa Rican legacy, our legacy, that I can speak of also as a former president. While I was in one of the sessions, so one of the students mentioned something to me. She said, I perceive you talk a lot about family, about history, about tradition. And it reminded me one thing I was not thinking about mentioning tonight, but I think it's worth. When I went to the UK to study, I was going there to find answers to make my country better. And I remember being very arrogant about it, thinking that everything we had was not okay, backward, underdeveloped. And when I got to the UK, I realized that our health system is older than the NHS of England. I realized that we have led struggles for peace, even before that many of the peace movements of the 60s in other parts of the world. So that was a humbling experience for me to share what we also had, and to go find solutions in our own history, in our own tradition. That made me look back to those 4 persons on that pictures. Those are my grandparents. They are of the same generation as these gentlemen. All of them, or none of them, finished grade school. Only my grandma on the left, she got into 5th grade. It was a generation that most of them did not wear shoes until they were 12 or so. That any of them speak but Spanish. None had a professional careers, they were working class. My grandparent was a carpenter, my other grandparent was an empirical electrician. But that generation, with so much limitations, was capable of achieving this kind of a legacy. A legacy that then extended to a national parks law that started to protect the environment, understanding the key role it played. They understand it also because of our electricity to take off the dependence of fossil fuels then, or imports of oil, required to preserve water sources. So the national park system started early as in 1970. As I mentioned, lots of our electricity already is clean and renewable. If you produce anything in Costa Rica out of electricity, it's already by definition a clean production. And then, in the 90s, this also legacy triggered that process you see in the image of the map of Costa Rica. Costa Rica was an agricultural country, mostly. So it suffered that process of deforestation. So when in 1940 we have 75% of our territory, or continental territory, covered by forest, when I was born in the 1980s or in 1980s, we had less than 30% of coverage, a dramatic change of deforestation. But then, with policies of national parks, or a program called Payment of Environmental Services, in which owners of forests, private owners of forests, receive payments to preserve their forests for the services they provide to society, we managed to become one of the few countries in the planet that has reversed deforestation, showing that it's possible to reverse deforestation. Actually, in the last measurement of 2024, forest coverage in Costa Rica is of 54%. And one interesting thing, when they decided to do universal healthcare, lots of people said it was impossible. It was too expensive for a small country, it could not withhold. And 80 years afterwards, we have that system. When they said we were to abolish the army and they were going to be obliterated from the face of earth without an army, many people said, having not an army, it's impossible. And still we are now existing. Actually demonstrating that in our region, armies were used not to protect people, but used against its own people to defend dictatorships or things like that. Also, when they say we're going to protect the forests or the ecosystems and we're going to pay owners, lots of people say you're going to destroy the economy. You're going to destroy agriculture production. But it actually triggered one of the largest clean industries we have now, which is tourism, and particularly ecotourism. 10% of the people that visit Costa Rica are bear watchers. 15% are surfers. That's the kind of ecotourism that we receive. Costa Rica, in that small plot of land, holds 6% of the planet's biodiversity because of the unique conditions of having two oceans on the sides, volcanic land, very steep, lots of different winds and conditions that make that a real library of life of the planet. Also, curiously enough, not having an army kind of galvanizes for lots of processes that occur in a very convulsed region in which we are. Just aside Nicaragua, that had a dictatorship from Somoza almost all last century until the Sandinista revolution of 1979, or the interventions in Guatemala or in Honduras, or the situations in Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba. But from all that convulsed context, and also crossing through the Cold War, somehow those conditions, a lot to do with the will and the leadership and the vision of people and the legacy, protected that small piece of land. And making reference to the legacy, not only of Costa Rica, but also of Borah Symposium. Gentleman, second gentleman from left to right, President Arias, was part of that process with the other Central American presidents that, in a very unique peace process, without intervention of foreign powers, managed that these 5 gentlemen agree on a peace process of Central America that took that region out of the war. The war in Guatemala, the war in Honduras, the war in Nicaragua, the one in El Salvador. And that still reverberates till now. President Arias was again afterwards also president of Costa Rica, and then came to talk with you a couple of years ago. And Daniel Ortega, who was one of the leaders of the Sandinista revolution, is now the dictator of neighbor Nicaragua, which is called the North Korea of the Americas. That serious is the situation that people are experiencing in Nicaragua. When I took office, it coincided with the protests of students, just like many of you, that were protesting for freedom in Nicaragua. And in just a matter of months, 80,000 refugees were received in Costa Rica because of violence. That's how that legacy of this gentleman is perhaps not the best, obviously, but that's how also tradition matters, for better and for worse. So that really had an impact on me when I decided to run for the presidency. I was 38 when I became president. I had the legacy of my grandparents very present, because if a generation that had no shoes, very scarce education, had built that unique legacy, it was a big burden for me. I needed to stand up to that occasion. I remember my grandparent once, when I graduated from high school, I got there to by now you can tell I was a really cocky, arrogant young guy. I got to my grandparents just after graduation from high school with the thingy they give you and all. And I just sit there, you know, whatever. And my grandpa said, congratulations. And I was like, yeah. And here he said, no, seriously, congratulations. Neither your grandma nor myself ever finished even school. And now you have finished high school. And I said, well, yeah. And then he said, and then your father, with our effort, went to university, and he's now an engineer. Well, yeah. And now you are in high school, and at your 17, you can speak English. Yeah. And then he said, so with all that knowledge and tools you have given us at such a short age, what is it you're going to do? So that was pretty much in the back of my head when I took the burden of going to work for my country. So I want to show also little vignettes of things related to environment, to peace, but also of how this was part of my own journey, how it transformed things. One has to do with the Costa Rican decarbonization plan we pushed for. When I was writing that inaugural speech, as I mentioned, lots of these things were at the back of my head. And one thing that really rang a bell is, if the generation of my grandparents was capable of something said to be impossible, as abolishing the armed forces, we could aim to something that appeared impossible. And in our case was the abolishment of the use of fossil fuels in our economy. So the goal of the decarbonization plan was make Costa Rica one of the first, if not the first country, to completely abolish the use of fossil fuels across its economy. And we did that. In less than 1 year, we crafted a piece of public policy that it's not our environmental plan. It's a plan that goes through all the realms and dimensions of the national activity, from the private and the public sector, to decarbonize the country. This is when we launched it with my wife, and also that's Cristiana Figueres, who was the head of the Climate Convention while the Paris Agreement in 2015. So she's a Costa Rican too. She's the daughter of the gentleman that abolished the army. So Cristiana was there, and we launched this ambitious plan. I remember one thing that Cristiana said. In one moment I was very skeptic, because I said, Cristiana, we're the first, nobody's doing this. And this time, many countries were not supporting the Paris Agreement. One example was Brazil was supposed to host the COP that year. They have backed off from hosting the COP. And I said, Cristiana, this is getting a little... And she said one thing I remember, Mr. President, this is like you have a big highway, and you have big trucks, but nobody's moving, so you have a big traffic jam. But you, Mr. President, you have a bicycle. And you can take that bicycle, and you can go very fast. And that had two advantages. You can get going, and people are going to notice. And that actually is what happened. So this is the principle behind our decarbonization plan. And this is important. It's the decoupling of usage of fossil fuels and growth. We are not saying we need to degrowth. No, we need to growth. Families need livelihoods. People need to make a living. We need a thriving economy. We need better jobs. We need better energy. We need cheaper energy. But in order to do that and have a planet, we need to decouple those. So that's the principle behind the plan. Keep thriving as a society while we don't use fossil fuels in a transition. So we took an inventory of our emissions, of our uses of energy in the different fields, also from absorption. And from this inventory, we developed this piece of public policy that's linked to 10 axes: changing public transportation, changing light fleet vehicles, cargo, electric system, commerce, resident, industry, residues, agriculture, not only as a less emitter, but as an absorbing component, forest, cattle. We do believe in eating meat, but mitigating the effect of its production. And this is how we craft the decarbonization plan. This is 2019, and this is the first decarbonization plan after the Paris Agreement in the planet. This is a little bit how it looks like. So in the research on how to do or produce livestock of low emissions, it's a complete change of how it's done. So before we had plots, and we'll cut the pasture, and we'll cut the trees and just have that. But then the new techniques have the pasture grow, the roots go deeper, they absorb more carbon, the cattle is happier with the shading, you preserve more water, you reduce the methane, even you can mitigate it completely, and you can have a better production. Similar with coffee. I was talking earlier to somebody about the production of coffee. Nama coffee is a coffee that is carbon neutral, even carbon negative, because the way it is produced. So it is good for the environment, it's good for the farmer, it's good for business. That's the logic of the decarbonization plan. Also, we became, after we created that network of electric chargers, remember that Costa Rica electricity is green and renewable already, so we created that whole network of electric chargers. We took off the taxes on imports of electric vehicles, and by 2022, we became, in the Americas, the highest per capita country with electric vehicles. To the date, the growth of imports of electric vehicles have become exponential. By the way, it's not been good necessarily for traffic, but we also developed a plan for an electric train, a 92-kilometer electric train fueled by clean energy for 200,000 passengers a day, zero emissions. And that's on the making. Politics has stepped on that. It's very linked to me and to my wife and to myself. So some politicians don't like to have that stamp, but it's going to happen eventually. Lots of the backslash was, the plan is going to destroy the economy. This is only to make us look green, greenwash, fanfare. But then, independent studies has demonstrated that the actual yield of the decarbonization plan is of $41 billion in net utility for the country. So it's not only good for the future generations, it's good for business. And it was run in more than 3,000 simulations, 3,000 possible scenarios, in which only 22 of those 3,000 are negative. As you can see it from the green, most of its implementation, it's on an economic positive side. And many people will say, but it doesn't matter. Costa Rica is just like this. You're not going to move the needle of climate change. We'll end up anywhere. Costa Rica is 0.00 of global emissions. But when the changes start to move around the world, and when people wanted to do decarbonization plans, they went out there to look what was out there. What were the blueprints? And what do they found? The Costa Rican decarbonization plan. That's got even to influence things like California's plan, which is one of the largest economies in the planet, larger than Germany now. So, to the question of a gentleman asking which is my favorite animal in Costa Rica, the favorite species, I will say the hummingbird, the one I started with. Why? And it's because an African tale about the hummingbird. They say there's a big forest, and there's a big fire in that forest, and all the animals run to take shelter. But there's only a small hummingbird going to the lake, grabbing a drop of water and throwing it to the fire, going back and forth, grabbing a drop of water, throwing it into the fire. All the big animals still go to that. Hummingbird has gone nuts. It's crazy. So the big animals come, step and say, go talk to the hummingbird and say, the hummingbird, what is it you're doing? It seems crazy. And the hummingbird says, I'm doing my part. So we were doing our part. And diplomatically, we were leading. And this also led to lots of preferential finance. It led to a lot of visibility, led to a lot of tourism again, in a virtuous cycle for us and for our people. Again, coherent and standing on the shoulders of the legacy of what was given to us before of us. Another case is, and those of you who like scuba diving, things of the forest, that's the Cocos Island in Costa Rica. So when we were in this path in 2019, as Brazil backed down of organizing COP, Chile, Costa Rica, and Spain were to organize the pre-COP and the COP of that year. In that gathering, scientific data was presented that in order for the planet to persist, not to disappear, we needed to protect at least 30% of all ecosystems on Earth by 2030. The logic is everything we see, the air we breathe, the water, the food, the garments, the materials, everything we use in humanity comes from nature. And there is not such a thing as life without nature. If we exhaust nature, we exhaust humanity. And that's the insight behind of that. We need to preserve some of that nature in order to keep life in the planet. There's a scenario you can keep growing until you exhaust everything. Or there's a scenario you keep a balance that you keep growing without exhausting. So under that premise, we created this High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, 4 countries. We created that coalition. The target, to protect 30% of land and 30% of oceans by 2030 in order to give a chance to the planet and to future generations. And we did that. In Glasgow, that's us, 4 presidents of Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, and Costa Rica. That's the areas we committed to protect. That's Galapagos behind, Cocos Island, one of the major repositories of life. As I was telling to somebody, it actually protects the biomass that lives there, so you can preserve things like tuna fish or other species for fishing purposes without exhausting the resource. We committed that in the COP of Glasgow, and on December 2021, we created the protected area surrounding the Cocos Island. Costa Rica, as you can see from the picture on the land, it's only 8% continental territory. 92% of its territory, it's in the ocean. So we had 30% already of protected areas in the land, but we had only protected 3% of our oceans. So we went from 3% to 30% in this decision. A proportion of the ocean that it's larger than Costa Rica in the continent. That's what we did. For this and for future generations, and not only of Costa Ricans, of people around the world. And we were the first movers. Again, everybody said it's impossible, it's too ambitious, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be a target that other countries are going to take. But then we launched that on 2019. On 2021, it was more than 40 countries that have endorsed that goal. On 2022, were more than 100 countries that had endorsed the target. And by December 2022, in the COP of Biodiversity, 190 countries, almost all of the countries in the international system, endorsed the 30 by 30, the one that we started. And this gives hope that we can manage to confront the climate and the environmental and the biodiversity crisis by taking these kinds of decisions. They said it was impossible, but it was possible, indeed. So I usually say, whenever somebody tells you any of your endeavors is impossible, thank them. Thank them. They're giving you drive. They're giving you purpose. They're giving you strength. And just briefly, another case from another realm. During the COVID pandemic, I am a pandemic president. I was from 2018 to 2022. I did many things difficult from 2018 to December of 2019. I then signed one very controversial bill, and I remember on December 2019 saying to myself and others, the hard part is over. Here comes the fun part. And along came COVID. So I want to show you all this. This is the performance by country on excess deaths after facing COVID. It's a study from David Bishai. He was the head of public health in Johns Hopkins. He's currently the head of public health in the University of Hong Kong. So in the best quintile, that means the country with less excess deaths on handling of COVID. Costa Rica is in the best quintile in the planet handling the country, handling the pandemic. If you look at the other countries that are there, are either way more wealthy, are wealthier, or are islands. How can you explain that? That a mid-income country manages to be in the best performers in least deaths in COVID? My explanation has to do a lot with legacy, with the kind of public system of health we receive, the education and the professionals that handle the teamwork. And I also always say that when confronted with the data and the science, many of you as practitioners in your fields know how that is. When you receive the data, there was a moment when you needed to decide whether you were going to protect lives as much as you can, or you were just going to move along accepting an amount of deaths. And that was an ethical decision. In our case, or my case, we decided to decrease the amount of death toll as much as possible, because a job you can create back, the loss of a life that's lost you can't. So that's our also, but that's also reflected. It's not as black and white as that. This reflects also mortality. You can see that Costa Rica performing, but that's also correlated with the economic rebound. So a good handling also helped with a good economic rebound. If you see the pairing planets, if you want, we are aligned with countries like Estonia or Germany. Sorry, that's in Spanish. The Netherlands, Switzerland, Ireland, countries that are way wealthier than us. How can you explain that someone less wealthier can perform better? My explanation, it could be faulty, but what I offer has to do with that kind of legacy tradition and institutions you have built to support that. We were the 7th country in the world that received vaccines because of how we handle the negotiations and the scientific data. And Doña Elizabeth, there with 91, was the first Costa Rican vaccinated on the 24th of December. She said to the press, "This is very important because my life is very important to me." So I won't forget Doña Elizabeth. And we did other things. While we were doing that, on May, very early on, we launched this initiative, CTAP, which was a repository of technology against COVID. So it was a free repository of access to give countries that did not have those technology the means to develop it by themselves. We launched that. Again, lots of people said it was worthless, impossible. Nobody was going to go to that. That's us launching it with Dr. Tedros from the World Health Organization. But then Spain started to put technology on the repository. The US put technology on the repository. And most recently, in 2024, that initiative has become a global initiative. It's not about technology on COVID anymore. It's about any technology for health that you can share for others to benefit. What does this have to do with peace? Well, I think that it's this determination, this inspiration, legacy matter. It matters. But also, not only the inspiration of our grandparents, in my case, it was this inspiration, my son. Because I at least was trying to build a better world for him. And I know many people around the world, even though we have different points of view in many things, even contradictory, perhaps in this we will agree a lot. In the empathy of love. And we want to leave a better planet to those small ones. And that gives us the option, the imperative of collaborating in these things. And also demonstrates that good change is possible. That things that are believed that are impossible can actually happen. And if a small country with limited resources can demonstrate that, it means that, in this privileged audience that I am, the sky is the limit of what you guys can do for the world, for peace, for the planet. The sky is the limit. Again, if somebody tells you this that you're doing is impossible, never going to happen, thank them. They're fueling you with the drive, the determination to doing things that matter. Another thing, and this is more a disclaimer, the next one. I've learned, they ask me to talk a lot about this sort of things, climate change, environmental, disarmament, and other things. But I learned one thing. The Costa Rican example is not to be taken literally. I'm not going around preaching everybody to abolish armies. And I'm not preaching you have to do exactly this. What I'm saying is, even though sometimes it seems very difficult, extraordinary things can be done. And it's not only all about money. There are other key drivers. And for me, those legacies matter. But if other people have told me, but in my country or in my neighborhood, there is not that kind of legacy. Well, the best moment to start building a legacy then is now. There's a saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So the second best time to plant a tree is now. And there's another saying that says something like, bless those who plant trees in which shade they won't get to sit. That's the interplay between the generations. That's our responsibility. That's what makes meaningful the things that we do. Again, don't take Costa Rican example literally. What I'm telling you is, I believe, I offer this as a view, not as a certainty, but at this point of my journey is the view that I can share, not the certainty. Good change is possible. Extraordinary is possible. Find your own ways to reach that. You will surprise yourselves. You will surprise others. And if that contributes to peace, to the well-being, to the understanding, even better. I have to be honest that I was feeling even today, or this couple of days, perhaps not necessarily as optimistic. On the day of our independence, there was a cover of the New York Times talking that Costa Rica now is becoming one of the largest countries for trafficking cocaine to Europe and the United States. After I left office in 2023, the homicide rate has doubled, a phenomenon that we're seeing all across Latin America. It's also endangering the United States, the problem of drugs in the region. I was feeling very sad. Also, there was a piece on The Guardian talking about pesticides and how it's affecting our crops and closing borders to our exports that we need to and we depend on. So I was feeling kind of bleak, to be honest. And then I came here. And by listening to some of your students and your questions and your projects, and by feeling the vibrant community in Idaho that has still a human scale, in which environment plays such a key role, and its people, I have to say you made me feel optimistic again to many things. Talking to the students, all that energy, remind me a lot when I was younger. So last but not least, and very important, if you have not, you can visit Costa Rica. And I really say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much for such a warm welcome. I really will never forget this university and this marvelous place. Thank you.
You're going to do questions?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
We have some time for Q&A. We have audience mics at either end. Here, we do ask if you come to the front to ask a question, that you do ask a question rather than give a statement of your own. Please introduce yourself and state your question, and then we'll go from there. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes for formal Q&A. So microphone here, microphone there.
Thank you. My suggestion, will be perhaps to take 3 questions, and I'll try to address those, so that gives more opportunity to other people, also because I tend to talk a lot sometimes.
firstly, I
Please
just
give me
wanted to-
your name.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, firstly, for being here. It's such an honor to be able to speak with you and to hear your point of views. I'm Caroline. I'm from Boise. Yeah, very honored to be here. I'm studying international relations. I hope to study international law one day. I have kind of a multifaceted question for you. I find Idaho traditionally to be more conservative, both voting-wise and culturally. Costa Rica is similar in the sense that I understand it to be pretty religious, as is the United States, very Christian-based. Do you believe that there is a significant either political or cultural difference that has allowed Costa Rica to create such, for lack of a better word, progressive policies in terms of like education and dealing with COVID, dealing with the climate crisis, in comparison to the United States, whereas we have such an issue sort of interlinking and understanding how we can sort of correlate like religion to be able to work with our newer technologies and like to correlate how we still respect religion, but at the same time still are using these new technologies and moving forward. Do you find that there is a difference in how our cultures or our politicians sort of react to that?
That's one.
Can I take? I'll address that, Carol. Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is John Bonilla. I'm a postdoctoral fellow on the Martin Institute. I'm from Colombia in Latin America. And I got a question. You have highlighted the importance of building institutions during the COVID-19 pandemic. How did creating a collective consensus among different stakeholders influence the effectiveness of Costa Rica's response? And what strategies would you recommend for fostering such as this kind of consensus in future crises? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Should I address those two? So thanks for the two questions. Caroline, I think that Costa Rica, even though it's smaller, might not be that different. Where are you? I lost you. Okay. It won't be as different to the United States. I think we have to embrace how diverse and complex our societies are, and work with that, and empathize and celebrate it, even though it's difficult. I've learned that, I think I learned it the hard way, and I've been reflecting a lot on that. When I got into office with what some will call a very progressive agenda. And it was kind of contradictory because on one side, well, it was not that contradictory to be honest, but one of the platforms in my case was same-sex marriage, which we made legal. And in Costa Rica, we advanced in the case of therapeutical abortion in cases of risk of the women's health. That was pending for 50 years, and I signed that finally. But perhaps looking back, I mean, COVID came along, we also had to work on taxes, we were heading into default, and our society was very polarized. And usually when we talk about polarization, we think that the others are the ones that are polarized. When I look back, I think that even though I don't regret what the things we've done, I understand that lots of pressure and change was put through the system in a society that's traditionally conservative. And that many people to the day still, let's say, they don't like me very much, to say the least. But I think that's one of the big challenges we have in the democratic world. Actually, that's not a challenge in countries or nations that are not democratic, because in a country that's not democratic, there's no discussion. You do basically what power says. And if you have another view, well, chances are you might get disappeared or you go to prison. Or it's a challenge for democracies. How can we cope and work and reach out to the other? And I think there are several things that have exacerbated that. One is inequality. We live in societies that are very unequal. I was talking earlier with another colleague of yours talking about gentrification. and in many countries, that is how wealth coexists with poverty globally. It's happening in Barcelona, it's happening in Boston, it's happening in Costa Rica a lot. I think we need to perhaps that's why also I'm loving so much Idaho, in the sense that there's a community here in Moscow. You can reach out to the other. We can dialogue. We don't take for granted that I'm either a conservative or a progressive, and then I suppose everything you think, and we have not even spoken, and we're already enemies. Perhaps let's go back to the Borah tradition, if we're talking about legacy. Even that capacity to go across the aisles. There's one book that I've read, I like it, from President John F. Kennedy, about courage, Profiles of Courage. And it has to do a lot of politicians that have actually enforced visionary policies, even though it's been difficult with their own constituencies, because that's courage. If you just ride the wave, there was a saying in the French Revolution that was, there goes the crowd, I'm its leader, therefore I go that way. That's not leadership. That's opportunism. Leadership takes that courage. And I think the courage we need now is actually to reach out, even though it appears so difficult, because we need to heal. We need to make it more cohesive. We need to try to, because what is the other option? Is it conflict? Is it separation? So after having being part of that kind of partisan politics, and that's kind of my reflection looking back. Perhaps being more empathic, being more open. Perhaps now dialogue, it's not as important with the people that think like I do, but with the people that don't. I used to talk a lot about this using words like green jobs or green energy. Now I understand that it's not about that rhetoric. It's about better jobs. It's about cheaper energy and cleaner energy, but for a future for all of us. I think that's what the thing that's missing. Also, if this country, as many countries, is based on religious freedom, as freedom of speech, we need to then go back to those roots. Other thing that I think it's affecting us a lot is social media, because it tends to polarize a lot, separates us. I think we need to own how we approach that, and it's a big challenge, and it's been difficult. But for democracies to prevail, we need to surpass those challenges. I believe. Again, I said, I don't share certainties, I share views. Similar with the pandemic. In the pandemic, it's complicated because it's a matter of public health. So, decade back, it was enough in our case to have the experts, the physicians, to share with the society what were the best practices. And that was enough. But when we got into this situation, we had to deal with other things like social media again. So sometimes what an expert was saying competed with a TikTok message. And the message of TikTok had way more reach. I share a statistic. We reached to 86% of vaccination with 2 doses, which was a big accomplishment. But at the same time, 75% of the population have heard that vaccines carry a chip. And 25% of the population thought it was true. So that means that there were people that got vaccinated thinking that they have a chip, statistically. So that's the difficulty. How to address that? I think we need to find, again, that more dialogue ways to do it. I don't think it's going back like only in a mandatory way you enforce it, and because it's worse. One of the things we did, I believe was correct, but it's complex. We made mandatory the vaccination for all personnel, public personnel. It got into a big public debate, but I think it saved lives. But then, as we have a political backlash in Costa Rica, the next government, the first decree they signed was lifting the mandatory vaccination. But now we have a decrease in vaccination coverage, not in COVID, in all vaccines. And that's happening in many countries in Latin America. But then I think, so we go to what we were doing before, I think we need to find new ways to persuade. Again, because what matters is, again, we want to protect those we love. And I think there's common ground there in doing that. But we need to find new ways. Impossible. If somebody says impossible, you say thank you, and you find a way to do it. That's the challenge.
Hello, Mr. President. I'm Haley. We met earlier. I grew up in Moscow. I went to the University of Idaho, and I'm elected member of our Moscow City Council. And so my question is not so much for me. I'm hoping it sparks some curiosity from the young minds in the audience. When did you know you wanted to run for president? Were you nervous? And was campaigning harder than the job? Because I joke a lot that knocking on doors was far more intimidating than what I get to do in this job representing the city.
Thank you. It's a great question. To be honest, I was not the kid that while they were playing the national anthem, looked at the horizon and said, one day, I was not that kid. I wanted to be, but first I wanted to be a goalkeeper, and then I wanted to be a rock star, and then I wanted to be a writer. You know, but I was always interested in politics because I think politics shares one thing with art and science. There's to it an important level of creativity. You need to create things. In music, you need to create lots of things and interpret. You have to put yourself in. In science too, when somebody solves a problem that's been there for decades, you need to create to get there and demonstrate it. Politics is similar in that way, with other skills and other challenges, but it's very similar. You have to create solutions. I decided to run because out of anger. Why? Because, long story short, in my party we were in power, but we were sure, most of my party, of the membership of the party and the leadership thought we were going to lose the next election because our polls were very low. So the leaders did like this. And they say, we'll wait till the next election. And I was really upset because of that, because we had been in opposition for 14 years. We got to power, and now everybody was backing off. And we were heading into a big fiscal crisis. And it was weird because I got kind of upset, but it was kind of a weird madness took upon me, saying I have to do something. There's a Harvard paper that states this, voice, exit, and loyalty. You know that paper? And either you are loyal to the situation, you express your point of view to try to change it, or you exit and you say. And I said, no, I have to do something. So that's how I decided to run. All my family was against it, even my wife. Now she's a politician. So that's how I decided. Campaigning was hard, was very hard. Was very hard and exhausting and emotionally exhausting, because you have to listen to people, everybody with a different point of view. It's like everybody could give you their piece of truth. And if you really want to receive it, you put it also part of yourself. If you don't care, shouldn't be that hard, but it's tough. But in my case, I think it's tough to prepare you for the job. That's how tough it is, because the job it's very tough. I remember many tough days, but one tough day was when they present the curves of the projections of death on COVID. So they presented several curves, and they said, well, this is the scenario in which we close this, and we do this and this and that, and this is the amount of people we see dying. If we don't do that, this amount of people will be dying. And if we don't do anything, this is the amount of people we project that are going to die. And it's your call. But that's a day in the office. So campaign is tough, but I think it's democratically, it's meant to be tough to prepare you for the job. And the only thing you carry in the job is the best you have, yourself. So you better be well prepared to give the best you have. How I try to deliver the best, I think I showed you already. That was what kept me going. That was what kept me going. So there are days you just, I mean, politicians are good at lying. They say, oh no, blah, blah, blah. It's tough in the body. I mean, lots of people say, you still have dark hair, you black hair. And I say, I don't care about the hair, I care about the weight. I gained so much weight out of stress, inflammation, eating terribly, not walking, not exercising because you have to do stuff. It's tough. But it's also, if you put purpose on it, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. If you can, when you connect with others, even those that one thing, and I close with that to other questions if there's time. I had Costa Rica's one chamber, 57 congressmen and women. I only had 10 votes. So I needed to negotiate everything. Everything. But I passed, it was the time in the last 40 years that we passed most significant legislation. That means you need to talk to the other. And you need to, we had a saying in Spanish, tienes que tragar sapos y sonreír. That means you need to swallow frogs and smile. Because that's part of the job. If your ego gets across, yeah, you're going to feel better. You're going to throw all your frustration, anger, and you're going to, but perhaps you won't get meaningful things for the community. And that's the goal, at least for me. Bueno.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, dear. I really enjoyed it.
So sitting here in the half of the river, that's
I know.
Rocky's parents.
Sir, it's a pleasure. You look just like my friend, colleague, Rocky.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.